His father left him not an inheritance but survival, a small farm on the edge of the forest, an old house with a sagging roof, a barn that creaked in every strong wind, and a patch of land so poor that it seemed to have been forgotten when the map of fertile lands was drawn. After his father's death, everything became even quieter, even colder, and even harder. Winter came not as a season, but as a sentence. First a thin frost settled, then the boards of the well cracked, then the sacks of grain on the shelf emptied, and then the real struggle began. Not for wealth, but simply to avoid dying. The MC knew what hunger looked like. He knew what an empty granary sounded like. He knew how to count the last pieces of firewood as though they were not splinters, but years of life. The farm survived only because of his stubbornness. A few chickens, an old goat, a small rye field that yielded less every year than it promised. In the evenings, he repaired fences, fixed the roof, caught mice in the storeroom, and thought that the world around him had moved on long ago, leaving him at the very edge of the map, where neither magic nor kings nor merchant caravans considered it worth stopping. But poverty has one quality. It makes a person observant. He noticed everything. Where the best birch branches for hoops grew in the forest, where rich clay could be found in the ravine, where berries appeared in spring, where the moss was dry and where it was watery, where tree roots produced strong fiber, and where a rotten stump could be used for kindling. And one day, early in the morning, when the sky was still gray and low, he took a basket, a knife, a small shovel, and went into the forest for anything that could help him survive another winter. The forest around the farm was old, dense, and not particularly friendly. An ordinary person would have stayed on the paths there if they dared to go deeper than half an hour at all. But the MC had known this forest since childhood. He knew how to read it the way others read people's faces. He gathered everything useful without rushing. First, clay. Dark, dense, good for pots and simple stove sealant. Then berries, still sour, but suitable for drying and boiling. Then young hazel shoots, suitable for baskets. He even found several mushrooms that looked edible, although he did not take risks without complete certainty. And yet at some point he noticed something strange. The farther he went, the denser the thicket became. Not merely denser, it was as though the forest itself was shifting, closing the passages. The branches intertwined so tightly that almost no light passed through from above. The moss on the stones was strangely bright. The trees stood too evenly, as though someone had deliberately planted them in circles and lines, and then forgotten to tell the forest that it was supposed to look natural. He stopped. The silence had changed. It was not the usual forest silence where birds, wind, and the rustling of animals could be heard. Here, the silence stood as though the air itself were holding its breath. The MC frowned. "Well, this is something else," he muttered. "And where are you leading me?" He climbed farther, pushing the branches apart with his hands. Several times he cut himself on dry twigs. Once he nearly fell into a ravine, but he still managed to squeeze through the thicket and emerged onto a small clearing. It was a hidden place, concealed so deeply that it would have been impossible to find by accident, unless the forest itself wanted to show the way. Before him was a round glade, small, covered with short, soft grass. Ancient stones with barely visible runes stood along the edges, covered with moss and cracks. And in the center were 5 portals, not arches, not gates, not glowing circles on the ground. Real portals, vertical, wavering like the surface of water suspended in the air. Each of them had its own color and shape. One shimmered sandy gold, another was deep blue like a winter sea. The third gleamed green and silver as though endless treetops were reflected within it. The fourth glowed white with a pinkish tint. The fifth was dark purple, almost black, like a starless night sky. The MC froze. He knew that magic existed. Everyone in his world knew. There were spellcasters, herbalists with enchantments, rare relics, and enchanted amulets owned by the wealthy. But he himself had never seen anything like this. Magic was something distant, expensive, foreign. On the farm where he lived, it existed only in stories and in the taxes collected from those who were stronger and richer. Worldbuilding. Stack Exchange, he took a step closer. And at that very moment, he realized that the portals were not merely glowing. Other places could be seen inside them. In the sandy one were endless dunes and stone towers. In the blue one, a water surface and ship masts. In the green one, dense trees, but strange ones, tall with purple leaves. In the white and pink one, blooming gardens, houses in the trees, and pale silhouettes. In the purple one, dark cliffs, smoke, and the lights of distant forges. The MC crouched down, stunned. What the... And then he saw something else. An ancient inscription had been carved into the nearest stone. It had not been completely erased. He was no fool. He did not climb into the first portal immediately. First, he walked around the clearing, touched the stones, checked the grass, and searched for tracks left by animals or people. He found old bone arrowheads, fragments of something resembling straps, and almost faded symbols on the stones. It seemed this place had been used a very long time ago. By evening, he returned home with half a basket of materials and a head full of questions. And that night, he did not sleep. He lay on the hard cot, stared at the ceiling, and understood that if the portals were real, then what lay before him was not merely a chance to survive. Before him lay an opportunity to change everything. The farm no longer had to remain poor. The world did not have to remain small. If those lands had what was lacking here, and this place had what was lacking there, then something greater than a simple exchange could be built. A system could be created. The next day, he returned to the portals, and this time, he entered the sandy gold one. The transition lasted only a single instant, and then the air changed. It became hot, dry, and very bright. The MC narrowed his eyes and saw an endless desert stretching before him to the horizon, where a haze shimmered above the sand. But it was not a desert in the usual sense. People lived there, or rather a race resembling humans, but clearly not entirely human. Tall, slender-boned, with warm bronze skin and eyes whose irises shimmered like copper. Women clearly predominated in this world. Among those he met during the first few days, almost everyone was either a huntress, a craftswoman, or a caravan guardian. There were few men, and they more often served as guides, blacksmiths, or keepers of water. The settlement he reached was built from stone, clay, and compressed sand. The houses resembled fortified adobe dwellings with deep inner courtyards. Everything was adapted to the heat. Narrow streets, awnings, storage pits, underground cisterns, cloth over the windows. He understood the main thing on the very first day. They had plenty of stone, clay, potter's earth, salt layers, and copper ore, but almost no water. Every drop here cost labor. Every bucket was a treasure. They knew how to build, forge, and shape clay, but agriculture was almost impossible without serious irrigation. Reddit advantages of the world. Stone and clay of excellent quality, copper, tin, rare ores, a highly developed craft culture, hardy and disciplined people. Disadvantages: extremely little water, almost no forest, little food suitable for mass cultivation, constant struggle over wells and cisterns. The MC quickly realized that here he could exchange timber, fresh water, charcoal and seeds for clay, copper ingots, and stone blocks. But first, he had to earn their trust. He did not come empty-handed. On his very first trip, he brought dry roots, strong timber, and 2 sacks of fresh water from his own world. To the desert women, it was almost a miracle. The water, clean, not salty, not overheated, and not collected from rare dew, immediately attracted attention. The MC did not bargain aggressively. He did something else. He showed them how to store water in clay-coated vessels so that it heated more slowly. He explained how to create deeper shade. He showed that if certain moisture-loving shrubs were planted in protected trenches, they would create shade for smaller plants. These were simple things, but they worked. At first, they treated him with suspicion, then with respect. And then one of the elder women, the keeper of the wells, invited him to a council. There, he learned more. The desert world had internal problems. Caravans were disappearing, Wells were drying up, and raiders from the rocky world were appearing more frequently along the borders. They were strong but poor in water and grain. Because of this, they constantly tried to seize wells and cisterns. The MC immediately understood. The desert world did not simply need goods, they needed stable trade, an alliance, and protection from their neighbors. And he could give them that. If he learned how to connect the worlds to one another, he entered the second world with more confidence. The forest world greeted him very differently. It smelled of damp earth, flowers, resin, and rain. The trees grew to incredible heights, and their trunks were so wide that people could have lived inside them. Bridges stretched between the branches. Houses, terraces, gardens, and ornaments made of bone, glass, and amber hung from them. This world turned out to have an almost entirely female structure of settlements. Men were rare but not absent. Power here belonged to matriarchal clans, and their leaders were simultaneously chieftesses, keepers of the forest, and judges of disputes. It was here that the MC first understood the difference between the worlds not only in terms of resources, but also in terms of culture. Advantages: endless timber, medicinal herbs, mushrooms, berries, rare poisons and antidotes, excellent hunting grounds, powerful growth and healing magic. Disadvantages: excessive humidity, difficulty storing metal and grain, little stone of suitable quality, constant illnesses caused by dampness, plenty of wood but almost no strong building stone. The forest world could live almost perfectly if it had the stone, clay, and crafted goods of the desert world. And the desert world could do the same if it had wood for building, heating, defense, and making vessels. The MC stayed with them for 2 weeks, helping with simple tasks: repairing bridge supports, making more convenient baskets for gathering herbs, and showing them how to fire clay more effectively in pits with proper ventilation. He did not behave like a teacher looking down on them. He worked beside them. This became his main instrument for earning trust. One day, one of the young huntresses asked him, "Why do you help everyone? What do you want in return?" The MC looked at the rain running over the leaves and calmly replied, "So that one winter stops deciding which of us survives." After that, they began listening to him more carefully. The third portal brought him to a place where the wind smelled of salt, fish, and cold freedom. It was a world of the sea. Not islands, but an actual world almost entirely covered with water. Island clans, floating villages, semi-nomadic sea people, and girls with gill-like markings on their necks who could dive for long periods lived there. Their homes stood on stilts, floating platforms, and small reef islands. They were incredibly rich in fish, shellfish, seaweed, and salt. They had strong timber from sunken forests, which they caught with nets and hauled onto dry land. But they catastrophically lacked stone, metal, and dry land for proper farming. Advantages: abundant fish and seafood, salt, maritime trade, floating forests and seaweed, excellent shipbuilders. Disadvantages: little stone, few metals, limited dry land, heavy dependence on the weather, dangerous sea monsters in the depths. Here the MC found what everyone else lacked: shipbuilding and navigation. He helped the sea women reinforce their pontoons, and they taught him how to weave waterproof nets, boil strong resin, and build light but durable boats. In return, he showed them how to bake sea salt in ceramics and how to build storage systems so that fresh water would not spoil. It was here that he realized that each world was not merely a source of resources. It was part of one great chain. The fourth portal proved to be the strangest: bright. When he entered, the world seemed almost unreal. White tree trunks, transparent bridges, gardens of silvery flowers, and houses that looked as though they had grown from light. It was a world of high terraces, hanging gardens, and almost ceremonial beauty. Refined, almost fairy tale races lived here, and once again there were far more women. They were tall and slender with gentle features and eyes that seemed to reflect the moon. Their society was wealthy but fragile, as though everything rested upon tradition, art, and magic rather than brute strength. Their strengths: healing magic, rare light crystals, art, fabrics, glass, excellent seeds of flowers and medicinal plants. Their weaknesses: few metals, weak military defenses, limited supplies of water and food, heavy dependence on trade. The MC understood almost immediately. This world would not survive a major war alone, but it could become the scientific and medical heart of the Alliance. It was here that he saw what could change everything: seeds of plants that cured fever, light crystals that accumulated energy, the finest fabrics that retained heat, and books containing magical diagrams that he could barely read but already wanted to copy. He did not rush to ask for everything at once, first he helped repair their greenhouses, which had begun collapsing because of old supports. Then he proposed an exchange: timber from the forest world, stone from the desert, salt and fish from the sea world in return for their medicinal plants, crystals, and knowledge. The elder keeper of the garden watched him for a long time and then said, "You do not look like a merchant. You look like a man who wants to build a staircase between worlds." The MC replied, "That is exactly what I am doing." The fifth portal proved to be the most dangerous. It brought him into a world of gray cliffs, black mines, and volcanic mist. The air was heavy here, the ground trembled from distant underground shocks, and the tribes lived in fortresses carved directly into the stone. These women were the harshest of all those he had seen. Strong, direct, armed, covered in dust and the marks of stonework. There was no beauty for beauty's sake here, only durability, endurance, and metal. Advantages: enormous deposits of ore, stone, basalt, obsidian, forges, rich coal seams, rare magical crystals born in the heat. Disadvantages: almost no forest, almost no water, little food, constant seismic danger, a harsh climate, and a rigid hierarchy. They were the most difficult to deal with. They did not believe words. They disliked promises. They respected only what could be touched, tested, and used. But that was exactly why they liked the MC more than the others did. He did not bring empty talk. He showed them how to make more reliable furnaces, how to reinforce mine supports, and how to use resin and cloth from the forest world to protect against cracks. He also understood their main problem. They had everything except proper trade. They knew how to extract metal but did not know to whom they could sell it safely. They had ore but went hungry. They could build fortresses but could not sustain large cities for long without food and water. And the MC understood. If all 5 worlds were united, the rocky world would become the forge, the desert world the stone reservoir and craft center, the forest world the source of timber and food, the sea world the trading artery, and the white world the heart of magic and healing. After 2 weeks of traveling, a map of the future was already taking shape in his mind. He realized that each world had not only resources but also a strategic role. The desert world provides stone, clay, copper, salt, and dry heat. It does not provide water or forests. The forest world provides timber, herbs, hunting, construction materials, and medicine. It does not provide enough stone or metal. The water world provides fish, salt, maritime culture, sea trade, and seaweed. It does not provide dry land or ores. The white world provides healing magic, seeds, fabrics, crystals, and knowledge. It does not provide military power or heavy resources. The rocky world provides metal, stone, forges, obsidian, and ore. It does not provide food or water. The problem was obvious. Each world was rich in something, but weak in something else. And if they were connected incorrectly, the result would be chaos. If connected correctly, the result would be a kingdom that no one could strangle with a single war or a single winter. But first, he had to convince not the worlds, but the people. And that proved to be the hardest part. He returned to his world with a basket full of new ideas and a sack of rare seeds, crystals, and pieces of metal that he had exchanged for simpler goods in the first worlds. For several weeks, he built a small warehouse near the forest thicket so that the portals would not be noticed by random people. Then he began inviting representatives of the worlds one by one, cautiously so as not to provoke conflict. First the desert people, then the forest people, then the sea people, then the white people, then the rocky people. He showed each of them what mattered to them. Water and clay to the desert people, ceramics and tools to the forest people, strong barrels and dry storage facilities to the sea people, protective wooden frames for gardens to the white people, food and a supply system to the rocky people. And finally, he proposed not merely trade, but an alliance. Not submission, not conquest, but mutual benefit. In my world, he said at the council, there is land where a common city can be built. Not beside the portal, but at the crossroads. There will be a warehouse, workshops, granaries, housing, and walls. Each world will receive its own representation. Each world will be able to bring here what it has in abundance and take away what it lacks. The forest chiefess watched him with interest. The desert keeper of the wells with caution. The sea captain with excitement. The white healer with hope. The rocky blacksmith with narrowed eyes. And who will rule? One of them asked. The MC did not try to evade the question. If you want a crown, find someone else. I am not building a throne. I am building a network. But if you need someone who will take on the dirty work, build the first walls, and keep everything from falling apart, I will be that man. The silence lasted a long time, then the sea captain smirked. You are either a fool or a very dangerous man. I hope it is the second, he replied. And so a new story began. When he first said aloud that he intended to unite 5 worlds, almost everyone who heard him laughed. Not maliciously, but rather the way people laugh at a man who has lived alone in the wilderness for too long and suddenly decided that he could turn the world upside down with a couple of good ideas. But he was not offended. He had lived on the farm too long not to understand one simple thing. People initially refuse to believe, not because you are wrong, but because they are afraid to imagine that someone might actually accomplish what he says. His name was Aaron. He did not call himself a hero, not because he did not want to, but because the word hero poorly suited a man who had spent 20 winters counting sacks of grain, patching the roof with cracked boards, and praying every year that the frost would not kill the goat before he found firewood. He had lived on the edge of the greater world for so long that he had almost forgotten what a real street sounded like, how a rich kitchen smelled, and what people who had reserves rather than only needs looked like. The farm he inherited from his father was a reminder, not a gift. The house was old, the field was poor, the barn was crooked, and the only thing on the farm still holding together on a promise was Aaron himself. After his father's death, he survived only because he had no right to die. There were no brothers, no money, no help. Only the forest, frozen lands, and stubbornness. It was this stubbornness that led him into the forest on the day when he accidentally found the hidden clearing with 5 portals. At first, he wanted to remain silent, to check everything, to understand whether it was real. Then he understood something else. If there were 5 lands in the world, each with its own strengths and weaknesses, while his world had only a farm, poverty, and endless scarcity, then silence would merely lead to someone greedier or more foolish finding the portals in his place one day. Aaron was neither the strongest, nor the most magically gifted, nor the smartest person in the kingdom. But he possessed something rarer. He knew how to see what was lacking, and he also knew not to waste an opportunity. He started small, not with cities or armies. He started with what all true builders of nations begin with: rules. First, he established an order for visiting the portals. Because if they were simply left open, each world would begin pulling the blanket toward itself. People would come to one for timber, another for ore, a third for medicinal herbs, and very quickly trade would turn into plunder. Therefore, Aaron began with a map. On old parchments, on boards, on the barn wall, everywhere he drew the same thing: 5 worlds, their resources, their weaknesses, their needs. He was not a mage, but he possessed the practical mind of a farmer who knew that if a new granary was not built this year, both people and livestock would die in winter. It was here that it became clear that his plan was not simply to carry useful things from different places. It was much greater. He wanted to create a network of interdependence. The desert world gives stone and clay and receives timber and water. The forest world gives wood and herbs and receives metal and stone. The water world gives salt, fish, and maritime trade, and receives grain and building materials. The white world gives magic, seeds, and healing, and receives protection, food, and materials for greenhouses. The rocky world gives metal and ore, and receives everything it cannot produce itself. This was no longer trade. It was a future political organism. And he understood the main thing perfectly. If one world became too dependent on another, that would become a reason for pressure. Therefore, it was necessary to ensure that each world benefited and preserved its dignity. Then the alliance would not be bondage, but a necessity that everyone would willingly support. Aaron chose the location for the first common settlement very carefully. Not directly beside the portals, that would have been too dangerous and noticeable. Not too far away, otherwise the convenience would be lost. He found a natural valley between the forest and the stone hills, where the ground was firm enough for construction. A river flowed nearby, and an old, almost forgotten forest trail led to the portal clearing. The place was ideal for two reasons. It was located in his world, which meant that he could control its borders. It was neutral enough that none of the worlds would feel like an invader. At first, he built it himself. Not literally alone. That would have been madness. But as an organizer, he began by digging, carrying, demonstrating, and working beside everyone himself. The people he brought from his world were skeptical at first, then surprised, and then they began helping without orders because they saw that he did not sit in warmth while others froze. The first buildings were simple: a common warehouse with dry walls, a granary, a workshop, a well, a council house, guest houses for representatives of the worlds, and a palisade fence. Then clay furnaces appeared, then a forge, then drying sheds for herbs, then covered trading awnings. All of this was built so that each world could see. No one's personal fortune was being created here. A place was being built where every world would benefit. And it worked. The desert craftswomen came first because they needed trees and water. They brought stone bowls, clay vessels, small copper utensils, and even several crystals that glowed with a soft amber light. The forest women brought entire carts of timber, resin, medicinal roots, and mushroom cultures. The sea people sent salt, fish in barrels, shells, and thick sea ropes. The white keepers brought seeds, dried herbs, healing elixirs, and light crystals. The rocky people brought metal blanks, ore, and several heavy anvils. But problems came along with the goods. Each world had not only resources but also customs, and customs often become politics. The desert women were disciplined and proud. They considered water almost sacred and disliked seeing it wasted. They were willing to trade but demanded an exact accounting of every drop. To them, wastefulness was almost an insult. The forest clans loved freedom and were extremely sensitive to any interference in their territories. They could give a great deal, but they would not tolerate being told how to live. Their attitude toward guests was simple. If you help, good. If you start giving orders, leave. The sea clans were cunning, loved bargaining, and adored news. To them, information was almost as valuable as salt. They could be friendly, but only as long as they sensed a benefit. The white world appeared to be the gentlest, but that was a dangerous illusion. Their women were polite, beautiful, and calm, but behind this stood an ancient tradition of rigid internal hierarchy. They could remember grievances for a long time, and never forgot those who attempted to impose authority upon them. The rocky world was the most difficult. There, strength, usefulness, and endurance were respected. Their women accustomed to mines and forges did not believe promises at all. They did not argue much. They simply watched how much you could endure before deciding whether you were worth speaking to. Arn understood this quickly, and he took the only correct step. He did not try to break their differences. He did not tell them, "You must become the same." He said, "Remain yourselves, but let us build a common market where everyone will receive what they lack." This greatly changed their attitude toward him, but it did not eliminate the problems. Because as soon as the market appeared, so did those who wanted to receive more than they were entitled to. The first serious blow came not from outside, but from within. A group of people from his own world appeared in the settlement near the portals. Peasants, craftsmen, and hunters to whom Aaron had given work and shelter. One of them, a merchant named Bran, quickly realized that the portals were not merely a road, but a source of power that could be manipulated. Bran began diverting some of the rare goods. Not immediately, in small quantities. Slightly more salt than had been recorded. Slightly less timber than was listed in the accounts. Several sacks of seeds disappeared through oversight. Several crystals ended up in his personal chest. And all of this happened so quietly that it was not noticed immediately. The problem was that Aaron was not naive. He had grown up in poverty, and poverty teaches a person to count not only money but lies. He noticed the inconsistencies before Bran himself thought that his scheme had become invisible. But instead of causing a public scandal, Aaron acted even more intelligently. He arranged a test. During one of the following exchanges, he deliberately gave Bran incorrect information about prices and watched where the information went. A day later, it became clear. Bran was not merely stealing. He was selling information about the flow of goods to one of the people from the Rocky world, hoping to create a secret channel for his own profit. This was no longer petty theft. It was an attempt to control the future trading system. Aaron did not shout. He did not beat him in the square. He did not turn him into a martyr. He did something worse. He gathered a common council of all 5 worlds and presented the evidence. Then he proposed a solution. Bran would lose access to all goods, he would be removed from the trading chain, and his position would be replaced by collective accounting, supervised by several representatives from different worlds. It was not merely a punishment, it was a demonstration of principle. From that day onward, everyone understood. Aaron was not building a chaotic market, but a structure where greed could exist, but could not control everything. When the settlement began to grow, the main limitation became clear: water. Aaron's farm could provide a little, the forest world could provide moisture, the sea world salt water, the desert world almost nothing, and the rocky world only rare underground springs. But if the settlement was to become something greater than a market, it needed a stable, protected water system. And it was here that Aaron first encountered the fact that uniting worlds was not only about goods. It was engineering and politics at the same time. He began with something simple. He dug a new deep well, reinforced it with a log frame, and installed filters made of sand and charcoal. But that was not enough. Then he proposed that the desert craftswomen make large clay cisterns underground, where water could be stored longer and evaporate more slowly. The forest people helped with resin for sealing. The white people taught them which herbs reduced water spoilage. The rocky people provided metal fastenings, and the sea people provided salt filters that allowed some of the unpleasant taste and contamination to be removed from the water. It was a true joint project. And it was through this project that people saw for the first time that the alliance was not a beautiful speech. An alliance is when everyone contributes to solving a problem that will kill them all if it is not resolved. Several months later, Aaron already had a map, not only of the portals, but of the entire future economic system. He divided the zones, embassies and warehouse yards near the portals, farther away the market and workshops, still farther the fields and farms, fishing facilities and water reservoirs by the river, forges and metal warehouses on the rocky elevation, medicinal gardens and woodworking workshops by the forest, and the outer wall and military camp on the southern side. He did not want palaces. He was building the working heart of a future state, and every week representatives of the different worlds came to him with new proposals. The desert people wanted to exchange stone blocks for wood for bridges. The forest people asked for metal for good saws and axes. The sea people demanded grain for their winter anchorage. The white people wanted rare minerals to strengthen the magic of their greenhouses, and the rocky people wanted food and medicinal herbs for the miners. Aaron managed all of this almost like farm accounting, only on a scale worthy of a future great power. People began calling him different things. Some called him the mediator, others the builder of paths. Someone from the sea people called him the man who knows how to connect shores. and one of the White Keepers described him far more accurately. He is not a king. He is a nexus. And it was true. He was becoming the nexus of 5 worlds. But peace could not remain peaceful forever. The Rocky clan, the harshest and most isolated, was the first to understand the value of a monopoly. Their senior military chiefess named Ragna decided that if they kept part of the metal for themselves and restricted supplies to the others, they could force their allies to pay more and become more dependent. She did not declare war. She simply began delaying shipments. At first, it looked like a logistical error, then like a delay caused by a mining accident. Then it became obvious. The Rocky people were withholding metal to see who would yield first. Aaron did not rush in with threats. He did what only good managers and very dangerous politicians know how to do. He struck at the point of dependency. He stopped the supplies of grain and medicinal herbs to the Rocky world. Not forever. For 2 weeks. That was enough for disruptions to begin at the mines. The miners began tiring faster, the herbal infusions ran out. The forges began working worse. And Ragna understood that by keeping the metal separate, they could quickly lose not only profit but people as well. She came herself to the council, without gifts, without a smile, but with respect. "You play hard, human," she said. "Too hard for a farmer." "I have not been only a farmer for a long time," Aaron replied. Ragna looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "That is good. It means you understand the price of leverage. Let us make a deal. We deliver the metal according to schedule." "You do not cut off our grain without warning," Aaron agreed. "But on one condition. If any of you ever decides to pressure the others through hunger, the alliance will collapse." And that applies to all worlds. And for the first time, the representatives of the 5 lands understood that Aaron was not merely a cunning mediator. He was building law and order. When the first settlement grew stronger, Aaron began noticing strange things. The portals were not equally stable. Sometimes they pulsated. Sometimes they changed the intensity of their light. Sometimes silhouettes that should not have been there flickered within their depths. Especially in one of them, the purple portal. It had seemed the most dangerous from the very beginning, and now this was being confirmed. Not only cliffs and smoke could be seen through it, but also strange shadows, as though the world on the other side were older than all the others. One day, Aaron saw an enormous stone arch deep within the portal, covered with symbols that belonged to none of the races of the 5 worlds. He understood the portals were not natural. They had been created. This discovery was worse than any war because it meant one thing. Someone long ago had already known that these worlds had to be connected. Someone had left them here not as a miracle, but as a system. Perhaps after a catastrophe, a war, or an escape. For the first time, Aaron understood that he was building the settlement not on empty ground, but upon the ruins of someone else's grand design. And then it became clear to him. Until he learned who had created the portals and why, his kingdom would remain incomplete. He returned to the portals not alone. By that time, he already had several trusted assistants from each world. Saya, a desert engineer who knew how to read stone and cracks. Lena, a forest huntress who knew every trail. Iara, a sea captain who traded faster than the wind. Mira, a white healer who treated even what was considered hopeless. And Ragna, the rocky blacksmith with whom he had made a truce. Together, they became the first true council of the 5 worlds. It was then that Aaron first said what he had been thinking ever since discovering the portals. We must not merely trade. We must combine the best. Learn from one another. Not in the sense of erasing differences, but in the sense of making them stronger. Saya nodded. Stone without wood is dead. Wood without metal is soft. Metal without food is useless. Water without protection disappears. Healing without people is unnecessary. Then, Mira said quietly, we are not 5 worlds. We are 5 halves of one future. Aaron smiled. There it is. The true meaning. Not 5 countries, not 5 suppliers, but one system that can only be grown together. But the stronger the alliance became, the more clearly its price revealed itself. Aaron's world began to change. New roads appeared, New warehouses, new markets, new taxes, though mild ones, to support construction. New professions, new conflicts. Some residents of his native land feared outsiders. Some who came from the other worlds feared losing their identity. Some wanted not an alliance, but supremacy. Some wanted complete isolation. Aaron understood that building walls was easier than building trust, and preserving trust when resources were at stake was even harder. And at that moment, he made the most important decision of his life. Instead of doing everything himself, he began delegating authority. He created a trade council, a security council, a crafts council, a water and harvest council, and a magic and healing council. Representatives of different worlds sat on every council. It was inconvenient, noisy, and endlessly contentious. But no one could claim that he was building a kingdom for one race or one group. It was the first step toward a true state. Now he had an alliance. Now there was a settlement. Now there were the first roads and storage facilities. Now there was the first common market. But Aaron could already see farther. He understood that if the portals had been created by someone ancient, then perhaps others existed as well. Perhaps there was a hidden sixth world. Perhaps the heart of this system lay somewhere. Perhaps the ancient war had not yet ended, and their worlds were merely fragments left beside one another. And the stronger his alliance became, the more likely it was that someone else would notice it. Someone who would not like the fact that a new kingdom had grown in place of the old, broken balance. And then the real story would begin. Arn understood that he had been wrong when the portal of the purple world did not merely tremble, but answered. It happened late at night. The settlement was already asleep. The lights in the workshops had gone out. The guard was changing on the wall, and Aaron himself, as usual, had remained by the warehouses, checking the exchange records. The wind carried damp moisture from the forest, and everything seemed ordinary until the stones in the portal clearing began glowing with a faint pulse. Not all 5, only 4. The purple portal, the very one that had looked ominous from the beginning, suddenly opened wider than before. Its surface rippled, and cold air flowed from its depths like air from a dungeon. Then the stone slab between the portals, previously covered with moss, slowly shifted aside. Beneath it was a 6th symbol. Old, almost erased, but readable. Not all gates lead outward, some lead downward. Aaron froze, because this meant one thing. He had built an alliance based on 5 worlds, while someone had originally left a hidden layer here as well. Not a world in the usual sense. Not a new land, but a path to something that had been deliberately concealed. He awakened only the most trusted, Saya from the desert world, Mira from the white world, Ragna from the rocky world, Lena from the forest world, and Yara from the sea world. They arrived an hour later. No one argued, no one joked. Everyone could feel it. Something ancient and extremely dangerous had awakened. Saya was the first to kneel beside the slab. "This is not our script," she said, running her fingers along the line of the rune. "And it is not ancient Rocky script either. This carving is different." "Older." "How much older?" Aaron asked. She raised her eyes. "Old enough that it could have been made by a civilization that existed before us. Or by those who left the portals as a system, not as a miracle." Mira frowned. "So, we live beside someone's abandoned machine." Ragna snorted. "If it is a machine, then we are only tiny specks of dust inside it." And at that very moment, the purple portal flared, and a figure stepped out of it. A woman. Tall, wearing a dark cloak, with skin the color of scorched lava and eyes that reflected not light but depth. Around her neck was a symbol resembling a broken spiral. None of the 5 races wore such a symbol. "You have been building this place blindly for far too long," she said. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "Who are you?" Aaron asked, slowly taking a step forward. She looked at him almost with pity. "I am one of the keepers of the lower path, and if you continue drawing resources upward without understanding, your portals will begin collapsing within a year." Silence fell. Aaron felt his fingers grow cold. Why? The woman shifted her gaze toward the other worlds as though deciding where to begin. Because your 5 lands are not separate kingdoms. They are supporting nodes. Their resources must pass through the center and return. If too much is removed without compensation, the system collapses, and then what was sealed after the war will open. That was how the true threat entered his life. Not hunger, not envy, not betrayal within the council, but an ancient structure that could collapse if he made a mistake. The woman's name was Naira, and as it turned out, she belonged to an ancient clan of keepers who had once maintained the balance between the worlds. They did not rule. They did not trade. They did not participate directly in the lives of the settlements. Their task was simpler and more terrifying, to ensure that the portals were not overloaded and did not disturb the balance. She led them into the lower chamber beneath the clearing, to a place where the air was cold, and the walls had been carved not by the hands of ordinary builders but by some ancient magical instrument. There, Aaron saw a map. Not on paper. On the wall. An enormous map of all 5 worlds connected by threads of light and dark nodes. At the center, a 6th symbol pulsated, the heart of the system. And beside it was a warning. If one world is exhausted, the others pay. Naira explained the essence of it. The portals were not merely doors, they were part of an ancient redistribution network. Long ago there had been more worlds. Many had disappeared. Some had been destroyed in the war. The remaining ones had been connected so that they could survive. Energy, water, food, metal, healing, everything had to circulate. But people, as always, tried to take more than they were entitled to. And someone sealed the central node, leaving only 5 accessible worlds and the hidden lower path. So, Aaron said slowly, if we take too much from one world, all the others suffer? Yes, Naira replied. And if you continue increasing the volume of trade without compensation, the portal will begin to weaken. First there will be malfunctions, then cracks, then a rupture. And what is below? Ragna asked. Naira remained silent for a moment. The Central Archive, and possibly the remnants of whoever created the network. At that, even Aaron felt a chill run down his spine. The entrance to the lower path had to be opened, not by force, but through a combination of magic and precise actions. Saya insisted on an engineering sequence. Mira insisted on healing reinforcement for the runes. Ragna insisted on applying physical pressure to the stone plate. Yara insisted that salt water had to flow through 3 channels. Lena insisted that someone had to go first and check for traps. In the end, Aaron went first himself. Because otherwise it would have been hypocrisy. The lower path turned out not to be a tunnel, but a long, spiral staircase descending deep underground. Old symbols resembling sleeping stars glowed on the walls. The air became drier and colder. The farther they descended, the stronger the feeling became that they were going not merely underground, but beneath history itself. A hall awaited them below. Enormous. Round. Twisted from black stone and silvery veins. At the center stood a pedestal upon which lay an artifact, not a crystal and not a book, but a thin plate that seemed to have been carved from glass and metal at the same time. When Aaron touched it, images flashed before his eyes. The world had once been whole. Then war came. Magical rifts tore the land apart. A civilization created the portal system to exchange resources. But some of the worlds became too greedy. Wars for control began. And someone, possibly the last architect, closed the central node, leaving only limited exchange. Aaron stepped back. So, the portals are not a gift. They are a rescue mechanism created after a catastrophe. Naira nodded. And you, with all your ambitions, have once again approached the threshold of the same choice. Preserve the balance or destroy it for the sake of growth. At that moment, Aaron faced the hardest decision of all. His dream had begun as a simple thought. Connect resources, save his land, stop dying every winter. But now it had become clear that if he simply drained wealth from the worlds into his settlement, he would repeat the mistake of the ancients. The problem was not the alliance. The problem was the greed for growth. And Aron did what no one expected of him. He did not increase the flow of resources. Instead, he proposed creating circular distribution. Each world gives what it has in abundance, but receives not only goods but restoration. Part of the resources goes into the central reserve, part supports the magic of the portals, and part helps the weaker regions within each world. This meant that his future city would become not a capital, draining the strength of others, but a nexus of exchange and restoration. People argued. Some were dissatisfied. Profits would become smaller. Some craftsmen believed they had to take more now while they had the chance. Some wanted to use the knowledge of the sixth path and seize the ancient technologies. But Aron, the stubborn and poor farmer who had once found 5 portals in the forest, stood his ground. "I will not build a kingdom that will one day kill us all," he said at the council. "If the price of wealth is the destruction of the network, we do not need such wealth." And it was after these words that many truly acknowledged him for the first time, not merely as a mediator, but as a leader. After they learned the truth about the portals, Aron directed his energy not toward expanding trade, but toward building a common workshop. It was not merely a forge. It was a resource processing center. There, desert clay was turned into durable pipes and cisterns, forest timber into beams, wheels, and frames, rocky ore into fastenings, tools, and mechanisms, sea salt into preservation and purification materials, and white medicinal herbs into medicines for workers and magical compounds for strengthening materials. The idea was simple. If resources from different worlds were combined here, then each world would receive not raw materials, but a finished result. This sharply reduced the need for excessive transportation. But it was then that the second crisis began. Problems appeared in 2 places at once. First, in the Sea World. There, the local elders, seeing that Aron was building not merely a warehouse but a system of mutual dependency, began fearing the loss of their own trading autonomy. They believed that the exchange center could eventually deprive them of their influence over the sea. And one of their young captains, too ambitious and too confident in herself, proposed creating a separate route and operating directly, bypassing the Common Council. Then, in the desert world. There, some of the clans decided that since a common water system now existed, they could demand special conditions and more grain in exchange for ore. They began withholding clay and stone as pressure, and almost simultaneously, someone in the rocky world spread a rumor that the white healers wanted to take their magical crystals and turn them into personal artifacts. Aron saw the pattern immediately. This was not a random division, it was a coordinated attack. Someone was trying to turn the worlds against one another while Aron built the common nexus. It was here that he needed not merely diplomacy but an investigation. At first, suspicion fell upon Bran, the former thief whom he had once removed from the system. But Bran proved to be too insignificant a figure. Then upon one of the sea intermediaries. Wrong again. Then upon a junior advisor from the White World. Once again? No. Once again? Then Aron did what good organizers and very dangerous rulers do. He began comparing not words, but benefits. Who benefited from the 5 worlds distrusting one another? Who benefited if the Common Council collapsed? Who would lose if the alliance grew stronger? The answer proved unpleasant. The ones who stood to gain were not only outside traders, but also one of the ancient clans of keepers which, as it turned out, had not disappeared completely. Some of them wanted to restore the old system of control, where the portals were their monopoly. They did not want Aron's settlement to be strong. They wanted weak, divided worlds that were easier to control. When Aron showed Nera the evidence, she closed her eyes, so they have decided to play the old game again after all. Who are they? Those who never forgave the portals being open to everyone. And then it became clear. What lay ahead was not merely an internal conflict, but a true war for the right to control the connection between worlds. Aron understood that if he began openly gathering an army, it would only accelerate the division. Therefore, he did what he knew best. He turned the economy into defense. He ordered reinforce the warehouses, build reserve cisterns, construct false trade routes, distribute resources so that no single world could quickly collapse the system, and create small mobile units consisting of representatives of all 5 worlds rather than just one. That was how his first mixed groups appeared. A desert engineer, a forest tracker, a sea archer, a white healer, and a rocky blacksmith. They were not merely fighters, they were symbols of the Alliance. And when the first saboteurs attempted to set fire to the common warehouse, they encountered not a mob, but an organized defense network. The battle was short but brutal. Lena noticed the tracks in advance. Saya blocked the passage with a stone slab. Ragna smashed the door open with a blow from an iron lever. Yara, bearing the mark of the sea, threw a heavy net over the attackers. Mira finished off those who tried to rise with magical blinding. Aaron did not stand aside. He came out himself carrying a simple farmer's knife and a short staff, and for the first time in a long while everyone saw. This man did not only build, he was ready to defend. After the attack, it became clear that there was no way back. The 5 worlds already had to choose. Either they continued moving forward together, or they once again fell into the old greed because of which the ancient system had once been sealed. Aaron gathered everyone in the settlement's main square. Before him stood representatives of the desert world in bronze cloaks, forest huntresses with baskets of herbs, sea women with salt-stiffened braids, white keepers in pale capes, rocky blacksmiths with coal dust on their hands, and his own people, farmers, craftsmen, shepherds, and children who had already grown up here beside the portals. He looked at them all and said, "I am not going to make you identical. I am not going to take away your strength and call it unity. But I know one thing. Separately, we are too easily vulnerable. Together, we are not merely wealthier. We are more resilient. And if someone wants to close the gates upon our path again, they will face not a settlement, but a people." It was the moment when the Alliance became something greater. Not a trade agreement, not a farmer's project, but the political birth of a new state. And then, as if out of spite, the 6th portal opened completely. What emerged from it were not enemies in the usual sense. Not an army, not monsters, but an emissary of the ancient system. A tall figure wearing a mask of white stone with a voice that seemed to speak from inside a well. "You have disturbed the ancient balance," the figure declared. "The unification of the worlds is permitted only under the supervision of the central node." Aaron stepped forward. "The balance was disturbed long before us. We merely began repairing what you kept locked away." The figure remained silent. Then it said, "If you continue, the sealed layers will open. The one who created this network did not want the lower worlds to be found." And for the first time, Aaron understood. The 6th passage led not only to the archive, it led to what had existed before the portals. To the causes of the war. To those who had once decided that the worlds could be divided for the sake of survival. To a truth that could make his kingdom stronger or destroy it. When the first lights of foreign campfires appeared on the horizon, Aaron already knew that the enemies were not coming for the market or the warehouses. They were coming for the symbol. The camp of the ancient keepers appeared on the plain north of the settlement so quickly that it seemed less like a march and more like the materialization of an old memory. Tents of dark fabric, stone stakes, ritual pillars carved with spirals, watchtowers. Not an army in the usual sense. More like a punitive mechanism assembled from discipline, magic, and hatred of change. Nera stood beside Aaron on the wall and silently watched the fire. "They are not going to negotiate," she said. "No," he replied. "They came to show that the old masters still consider themselves masters." Below, behind the gates, the defenders of the settlement were already forming ranks. Not only his own people. All 5 worlds had sent their fighters. This was important. The enemies had to see not a farm in the wilderness, but an alliance with a body. On the left stood desert spearswomen wearing bronze shoulder guards. Beside them were forest archers with short composite bows. Sea fighters secured nets and grappling hooks. White keepers carried healing flasks and light crystals at their belts. Rocky blacksmiths in heavy vests checked hammers, axes, and iron bars for the gates. Aaron looked at them and thought not about the battle, but about the most terrifying thing in war. If even one group fled, trust would collapse. If one world retreated, the others would decide that the alliance had been a mistake. That was exactly why he did not hide. He climbed onto the outer platform of the wall where everyone could see him, and did what they least expected of him. He placed the alliance's flag beside him. Not the banner of one people, but the common symbol of the 5 worlds in his land. "Let them see," he said. "Let them know that we are not separate." And it worked. The people on the walls straightened. Even those who were trembling held themselves more firmly. 3 figures emerged from the keeper's camp. The first wore a white mask without a mouth. The second wore a heavy black robe with metal plates on her arms. The third was tall, carrying a staff curved like a tree root. They stopped at arrow range and demanded, "You have violated the order. Surrender control over the 6th passage. Prohibit any further mixing of resources. Return the portals to the supervision of the keepers." Aaron did not answer immediately. Not because he did not know what to say, but because he wanted everyone to hear him. "You speak of order," he finally said, "but your order left the worlds to starve separately from one another. Your order made trade a secret and fear the law. If we had continued living like that, the portals would have collapsed, while your archives would have remained dead stones." The mask did not move. The access limit was established for the sake of survival. "No," Aaron said calmly. "The limit was established for the sake of control." The word struck harder than an arrow. Because it was true and they knew it. Nera stepped forward. "They restored the lower path," she said. "The ancient archive has been reopened. The meaning of the portals can no longer be hidden." The third keeper, the one with the staff, changed her posture for the first time. "Then you understand what this means. If the network is fully opened, many ancient seals will disappear." "So what?" Ragna asked from the tower. "Are we supposed to be afraid because you are afraid of losing the keys?" The keeper did not answer, and that was enough to make it clear to everyone. Yes, that was exactly what they feared. When the negotiations ended, the siege began, but not an ordinary one. The keepers had come prepared. They had brought not only warriors, but also ancient mechanisms that had once been used to control portal nodes. Large stone catapults powered by crystals. Narrow resonator towers that could weaken runes from a distance. Black drums whose rumbling created magical vibrations in the ground. Saya turned pale when she saw them. "If they activate the resonators, the portal clearing may begin to crumble. Then we must prevent them from completing the calibration," Aaron said. "Easier said than done," Ragna snorted. And it was true. The siege began with a poorly understood battle in which they could not simply go out and strike the enemy. They had to disrupt calculations, interrupt rituals, and sabotage the calibration of the devices. Aaron understood the most important thing. If the keepers thought he was defending only the walls, he had already lost. They had to strike their rear, their warehouses, their crystals, and their resonators. He summoned the council. "Lena, take the forest people and circle around their camp through the southern thicket. Yara, take the sea people to the river. Disrupt their supplies and intercept their water. Rana, reinforce the gates and assign blacksmith groups to repair the walls. Saya, find the weak point in their resonators. Mira, take care of the wounded and prepare protective wards for the wall. And I will go to the portals." "Alone?" Mira asked sharply. "No," Aaron replied. "With Nera." While the first phase of the siege began on the plain, Aaron and Nera descended into the lower path again. But now they were not going to the archive. They were going deeper to where the ancient network was connected to the central core. If the portals were veins, then the center had to be the heart, and if the enemies were striking the veins, the heart had to be protected. In an underground gallery illuminated by dim runes, they found a machine hall. Enormous rings of stone and metal stood there, connected by spikes and channels. In the center was a crystal the size of a human torso, cracked but alive. It hummed quietly like distant thunder. "The heart of the system," Nera whispered. Aaron stepped closer and saw something strange. The crystal did not feed on magic by itself. It redistributed it. And if it was overloaded, it would not explode immediately. First, it would begin to malfunction, transferring excess energy into random nodes. That is why the old keepers wanted control, he said. They feared a chain reaction. And not without reason, Neira replied. At that very moment, as though confirming her words, one of the side channels emitted a spark. Images of distant worlds flared on the wall. The portal network had been disturbed by the siege above. Aaron understood. If the keepers managed to damage the external node, the heart would redirect the impact here. Then we must not merely defend the settlement, we must activate the emergency circuit. What are you doing? Neira asked when he began removing his glove. What a farmer does when a storm threatens, he replied. Ensuring the harvest. He placed his palm into the runic recess and gave the system his signature. The network responded. The runic rings began humming more loudly. A stream of energy flowed from the depths of the network. Aaron felt cold run along his arm, as though magic itself were testing his endurance. There were no screens here, but he saw the result. Signals from distant worlds flared across the walls. Somewhere in the desert, reservoirs were being reinforced. Somewhere in the forest, a drying stream was being sealed off. Somewhere at sea, protective ropes were being stretched. Somewhere in the white gardens, protective crystals were being ignited. Somewhere in the cliffs, the forges were being strengthened. The network was working. But now, any attack against one world could cause an automatic response from the others. Aaron froze, realizing what he had just done. He had not merely protected the system, he had made it interdependent on a new level. If someone attacked one world, help would come from another more quickly. If someone attempted to collapse a node, the system would redistribute the load. If someone tried to take too much, they would receive an empty return. It was brilliant and extremely dangerous. You have just turned the portals into a living defense network, Neira said quietly. I merely corrected what had been left unfinished, he replied. But then a crack spread across the crystal. They both froze. Too much? Aaron asked. Neira looked at the runic readings and slowly nodded. The network will endure, but not without consequences. Now the ancient keepers will feel it. And if they possess the old combat codes, they will understand that you have interfered with the foundation of the system. Let them know, Aaron said. The war has already begun. On the surface, the siege had turned into a fiery meat grinder. The Keeper's resonators finally began working, but not in the way they had expected. Seiya found a weakness in their calibration and sent a reverse wave through a chain of mirrored plates assembled in haste. One of the tower crystals exploded. The second cracked. The third began glowing uselessly like an overheated lantern. Lena and her huntresses burned their supplies from the cover of the forest, firing resin-soaked arrows at the dry platforms. Yara intercepted their water reserves and set a trap on the bridge. Ragna personally smashed the first breaches into the siege tower with a sledgehammer. Mira kept dozens of wounded people on their feet throughout the night. But the most important moment came when the Keepers attempted to storm the gates. They expected the settlement to falter. It did not falter, because fighters from all 5 worlds stood together before the gates. The desert people held spears. The forest people held bows. The sea people held hooks and nets. The white people held protective circles. The rocky people held iron shields and hammers. Aaron climbed onto the wall, saw this, and allowed himself to believe for the first time. His kingdom already existed. Not on paper, not in a dream, but in the people who, at the most terrifying moment, had not scattered back to their own worlds. The Keepers stepped back. That was enough for Ragna to shout, "Now!" And the gates opened. Aaron understood. If they remained under siege, the Keepers would slowly exhaust the defenders. Therefore, they had to go outside and break their formation. It was risky, but not madness. The Keepers had complex machinery, they had magic, but they relied on fear, not answering audacity. Therefore, he led out the mixed units. It was not merely an attack, it was a demonstration of a new form of warfare. The desert people broke stone barriers, the forest people hid in the smoke and struck the flanks, the sea people intercepted command groups, The white people shielded the wounded and blinded the mages, and the rocky people crashed into the densest points of the formation. Aaron walked with them. Not in the first ranks, of course, but close enough for the people to see him and understand. He was not hiding behind them. He was beside them. When the Keepers' first line collapsed, it became clear that their forces were not prepared for true mixed combat. They were accustomed to the ancient logic: one center, one control, one command. But here there were many minds, many tactics, and many small decisions being made at once. Their formation began to break. Then the Keeper in the white mask stepped forward. She raised her staff and the air around her became thick like water. For a second, everything froze. Aaron understood. This was not an ordinary spell. It was an invocation of ancient law. And he answered, not with a sword either, but with words. "You sealed the worlds away from war," he said loudly, "but not from hunger, not from cold, not from loneliness, not from fear. We are not going to restore the old tyranny merely because it called itself order." The mask turned toward him. "You do not understand the price of opening them." "I understand," Aaron said. "I am the one paying it." And at that moment, his people struck from both flanks. The battle was long, but not endless. When one of the resonator towers shattered and another unit of Keepers retreated from the gates, it became clear their strength did not lie in numbers. Their strength lay in their monopoly over knowledge. And as soon as Aaron tore away that veil, their power began to crack. Nera later explained the most important thing. The old Keepers were not pure evil. They were the heirs of a catastrophe. When the ancient worlds had nearly destroyed one another, it was the Keepers who survived and decided to seal the portal network. For this, they had once genuinely been respected as saviors. But then part of the Order decided that a temporary measure should become permanent power. They had grown accustomed to being the only ones who knew how the system worked. Aaron listened silently and thought about how often good decays, not from cruelty, but from the fear of losing control. "Then they are not afraid of us," he finally said. "They are afraid that the worlds will be able to live without their supervision." "Yes," Nera replied, "and that makes them dangerous. Then we will end this not with revenge, but with replacement." Nera looked at him carefully. "You have a strange way of waging war, farmer." "I do not like wars," he replied. "I like order. Sometimes order simply has to be fought for." After the siege, nothing was ever the same again. The five worlds, having seen that they could stand together against the ancient Keepers, stopped viewing the alliance as an experiment. Now it was a fact, a reality, a foundation. Construction of the second circle began. Craft schools, common warehouses, safe passages, embassy houses, healing courtyards, forge lines, water reserves, and magical portal stabilizers. Aaron was no longer merely the man who had found the gates. He had become the one who learned how to keep them open without causing destruction. His settlement began to be called by different names: the Nexus of Five Lands, the Crossroads, the First Circle, the House of the Path. But behind his back, another word was being spoken more and more often: Kingdom. Aaron was in no hurry to accept the title, but he did not reject the responsibility either, because he understood. If someone had to become the center of balance, let it be not a greedy aristocrat, but a man who had once known what it was like to die from cold in a poorhouse and hope that winter would not take the last thing he had. A new concern followed the victory. In the archive of the lower path, they found a sealed chamber that had not been opened since the time of the ancient catastrophe. Inside on the wall was a symbol no one had seen before. Not a circle or a spiral, but a broken vertical line. Nera turned pale when she saw it. "That is not the symbol of the Keepers." "Then whose is it?" Aaron asked. She did not answer immediately. "It is the symbol of those who did not want to seal the worlds, those who wanted to rewrite them." And then it became clear, the ancient history of the portals was not merely about balance. There had been a third party, those who believed that the worlds could be changed by force. And if their legacy was still alive, then the Keeper's siege had only been the first wave. Aaron looked at the symbol, and a cold feeling grew inside him. He had built an alliance, he had survived the siege, he had transformed the portals into a defense system. But something greater lay ahead. Because sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the one knocking at the gates. It is the one who has long been walking inside the ruins and waiting for you to open the door yourself. After the siege, Aaron understood that the kingdom needed not only a market, but also its own symbol of trust. As long as each world traded its rare goods in its own way, the alliance remained fragile. The desert people had their own weighing stones. The sea people had shell tokens. The rocky people had ingots and measuring rods. The white people had crystalline exchange tablets. The forest people had knotted markings on cords where each knot represented an obligation or service. All of this worked within the individual cultures but connected them poorly to one another. Aaron decided to create not merely money but a universal symbol of exchange. Not pure gold, too heavy and too desirable to thieves. Not paper, too easy to counterfeit in a world where magic and craftsmanship existed side by side. He chose glassstone, thin plates of processed crystalline slate, reinforced with a magical seal from the white world and a metal rim made by the rocky blacksmiths. Each plate bore the symbol of the alliance, a number, a hidden verification rune, and a mark identifying the world that had issued the batch. It was not a coin in the usual sense. It was an obligation token that confirmed not only value but also trust between worlds. The desert people accepted it first because it was important to them that every transaction leave a record. The sea people quickly appreciated the convenience of carrying value without sacks and chests. The forest people were suspicious at first but agreed when they saw that the tokens helped avoid endless disputes over debts. The white people immediately proposed seals to protect against counterfeiting. The rocky people made the shape of the token almost impossible to counterfeit without their tools. That was how the first common currency appeared, and with it, the first common authority. The day when the coin first passed from hand to hand in the great market became almost a celebration for the settlement. But Aaron did not celebrate too soon. He knew too well. Every new system attracts those who want to use it for their own benefit. Therefore, he summoned the Council of Five. Not merely a council of merchants, not merely a council of warriors, but a common political circle where every world had the right to speak. At the meeting, they discussed control over the weight and authenticity of the tokens, distribution of duties, rules for warehouses, penalties for counterfeiting, the procedure for exchange between worlds, and protection against those who might accumulate too much and block the flows. Aaron sat at the head, but not as an absolute ruler, rather as the one who kept the system from falling apart. And it was then that a problem emerged. Some were unhappy that the tokens passed through the Common Council. This particularly concerned the old trading clans of the Sea World and some of the desert keepers of water. They felt that their private power was now diminishing. One of the sea captains, Yara, spoke directly. If the currency is shared, then authority over it is shared. And if authority is shared, who will decide whether your council begins dictating prices to us tomorrow? The desert woman Saya supported her, although more gently. Trust is useful. But when water and clay are scarce, every clan wants to maintain a reserve. Who guarantees that the common bank will not become a means of pressure? Aaron listened to everything until the end and answered simply, "No one guarantees it, except ourselves." That is precisely why control over the currency cannot be concentrated in one pair of hands. It must be divided between the councils. If one world abuses it, the others will revoke its privileges. That is how the network works. Not through fear, but through mutual control. Not everyone liked this, but it was honest. By that time, the first children who did not fully belong to any single world had already been born in the settlement. One boy had desert-colored skin and the eyes of his forest mother. One young female student had the fluid movements of the sea people and the magical sensitivity of the white people. Another child had strong, rocky hands and a habit of collecting pebbles like treasures. They grew up in a place where the traditional boundaries between worlds no longer seemed sacred. And Aaron understood that if they were not educated deliberately, they would be raised by the fears of others. Therefore, he founded a school, Not an academy for the elite, not a magical tower, but an ordinary and extremely important place where they were taught to read and count using a unified system, understand the languages of the five worlds, work with resources, distinguish honest trade from deception, the basics of survival, craftsmanship and basic magic, and the history of the portals and the ancient war. The White Keepers initially wanted to teach only magical discipline. The Rocky people insisted on craftsmanship. The Sea people wanted maritime navigation. The Forest people wanted knowledge of herbs and tracks. The Desert people wanted water, stone, and precise calculations. Aran combined all of this into a single program. That was how the Children of the Alliance appeared, and they were more dangerous than any army, because they could no longer be convinced that the worlds had to hate one another. But at the very moment when it seemed that the kingdom was beginning to grow stronger, a new enemy appeared. Not the Keepers, not an ancient faction, not even an external raid. It was the thirst for power within the Alliance itself. One of the advisors from the desert world, a man named Tarim, decided that the new currency and common warehouses depended too heavily upon Aran. He was intelligent, spoke well, and perfectly understood how society functioned when everything was built around scarcity. He quietly began gathering around himself those who believed that Aran had held the center of power for too long. Tarim was no fool. He was not going to attack openly. He began with trade. He created private contracts between his people and individual warehouses. He offered the Sea people better rates. He offered the Forest people hidden discounts on medicinal herbs. The Rocky people priority deliveries of ore. The White people rare stones for rituals. All of this looked like normal business, but in essence, he had begun building a parallel economy within the Alliance. People did not notice immediately. Aran noticed almost at once, but he wanted to see how far it would go. He allowed Tarim to feel free and watched where he would lead the people. After several weeks, it became clear Tarim was not planning a coup. He wanted to transform part of the Alliance into a separate center of power where Aran would be needed only as a convenient symbol. It was dangerous, even more frightening than open betrayal, because such a person destroys a system not with a saber, but with an alternative. The division did not begin with murders, it began with conversations. Why do we need a unified market if we can sell things ourselves? Why give part of our income to the common reserve? Why must all decisions pass through Aran's council? Perhaps it is time to create a second center? Words, small and polite like drops of water, but it is precisely such drops that wear away stone. Aran understood. If he did not intervene now, the Alliance would split along economic lines. The Desert people and some of the Sea people would follow Tarim. The Forest people would begin to hesitate. The Rocky people would isolate themselves, and the White people would retreat into neutrality. And a civil fracture would begin. He gathered an expanded council of 5 and showed everyone the records. Contracts, signatures, secret routes, discrepancies in the accounts, hidden rates, and, most importantly, evidence that Tarim was not merely trading, but creating a structure that weakened the Alliance. But Aran did not immediately demand his arrest. Instead, he proposed a public debate. Tarim, confident in his charisma, agreed, and that was his mistake. Almost the entire settlement gathered in the square. Tarim spoke beautifully. He spoke about the freedom of the worlds, about how the single center was too large, too bureaucratic, and too dependent on the personal will of one man. He reminded them that every world should determine its own destiny. It sounded reasonable. More than that, it was half true. Aran did not interrupt. When his turn came, he stood calmly and said, "Freedom without connection is weakness disguised as pride. If every world closes itself off, scarcity will strangle it again. We have already lived that way. The farm against winter, the desert against water, the cliffs against food, the forest against metal, the sea against dry land. That is not freedom. It is a chain, merely broken into 5 separate pieces." He paused. "I am not asking you to abandon your identities. I am asking you to acknowledge one simple thing, Our future is built not upon independence from everyone, but upon honest interconnection. Tarim does not want freedom. He wants to control the part of the flow that he manages to take for himself. Tarim smiled. Prove it. And Aaron showed them the most important thing: calculations. He displayed the real resource distribution figures before everyone. He showed how the common reserve had helped them survive the drought. He showed how the joint forage had accelerated production. He showed how the children of the Alliance no longer suffered from the old boundaries. And then he said, "If you want to test me, I do not object. But if you remove the common center, you will not gain freedom. You will gain a market where the strong tear the weak apart." After that, most of the assembly sided with him. Tarim lost publicly, but he did not surrender. That same night, one of the central warehouses caught fire. Not accidentally, not because of a lamp, and not because of carelessness. It was an attempted arson. And an intelligent one. If the grain reserve had burned, panic would have begun within the Alliance, followed by mutual accusations. But Arn had already expected something like this. Hidden water channels had been installed in the warehouse yard, and as soon as the first beam caught fire, water from the upper cisterns flowed through the gutters directly into the flames. The forest people and the sea people worked together, sealing off the passages. The rocky people dragged out the collapsed beams. The white healers led away workers poisoned by smoke. And yet it was clear this was not merely sabotage. It was a test. Tarim wanted to see how quickly Aaron would lose control, and he realized it would not happen quickly. At dawn, Aaron came to him personally. Tarim stood beside his tent, calm as though nothing had happened. "Was it you?" Aaron asked. Tarim shrugged. "You have no evidence. I have consequences. Consequences are not a crime." Aaron looked at him for several long seconds. Then he said, "No, but they reveal character." And at that moment, he understood. This was not merely an ambitious man standing before him. This was a man who sincerely believed that he was right. And that was more dangerous than an ordinary villain. In Aaron's kingdom, everything could not be solved with a single sword. If he killed Tarim, some of the desert clans might leave after him. If he forgave him too easily, he would show weakness. If he simply exiled him, Tarim would become the center of opposition outside. Therefore, Aaron chose a rare path. He deprived Tarim of access to the common storage facilities and the council, but did not expel him from the settlement. Instead, he appointed him to a supervised position, keeping records of individual regional exchanges under the control of the council and the school. It was not forgiveness, not execution, but a test. If Tarim truly cared about freedom, he would be able to work for the benefit of the system without destroying it. If he craved power, he would begin sabotaging it and expose himself. And this decision showed everyone that the king of this alliance knew not only how to build, but also how to preserve balance without unnecessary bloodshed. By that time, no one called Aaron merely a farmer anymore. Some called him the founder, others the Nexus ruler. Still others called him the keeper of balance. The simplest called him king. He resisted the title for a long time, but in the end he agreed to a different one. First keeper of the Alliance of 5 Worlds. It sounded not like a throne, but like a duty. And that was honest. Because Aaron had never wanted to be the king of wealth. He wanted to ensure that no world would ever again die from lacking something that the others possessed in abundance. One more unopened layer remained in the underground archive. Nera had warned him about it in advance. What you have built is stable, but beneath your network there is still something the ancients were afraid to awaken. What exactly? I do not know, but there is protection there, and it does not belong to the keepers. Aaron looked at her. "So there is someone older than you?" She nodded. "Much older." And then it became clear. All their victories were only the first floor of a far more ancient story. Somewhere below lay a source that could explain everything. Why the portals had been created at all, why some of the worlds had disappeared, who had been the architect of the system, and what would happen if the final sealed circle were opened. Aaron slowly clenched his hand into a fist. Once again, he would have to go where neither money, nor the council, nor currency, nor trade could help. To a place where only will mattered. The farther down they descended, the quieter the world above became. Not because the sounds disappeared, but because space itself seemed to devour them. The air beneath the lower path was dry, cold, and strangely heavy, like before a storm. Except there was no storm here and there could not be one. The stone walls glowed with dim lines, as though frozen rivers of light flowed through them. Aaron walked in front with a torch, Nera half a step behind him. Only the most reliable followed them: Saya, Ragna, Mira, Lena, and Yara. He left the others above so that the wall would not be abandoned if the underground path turned out to be a trap. "If the protection here is older than the keepers," Saya said quietly, "then this is either something extremely valuable or extremely dangerous." "Those things usually coincide," Ragna replied grimly. They emerged before a doorway arch that should not have existed. Not stone, not metal, not crystal. Something in between. The surface of the door was smooth like glass, but living runes had grown into its edges. It was not merely locked, it was unwanted, as though the world itself were trying to forget that something existed behind it. In the middle of the door was a symbol, a broken line, the same one they had already seen in the archive. Nera turned pale. "These are not gates. This is the seal of the final level." "Final for what?" Aaron asked. She did not answer immediately, then she exhaled. "For what remains of the creator of the network." The silence grew thicker. "You mean he is here?" Mira asked slowly. "Not necessarily in a living form," Nera replied. "But yes, his trace is here." Arn approached the door and placed his palm against its surface. It was cold, and suddenly, for a moment, a faint pulse ran across its entire surface, as though something inside had recognized him. Opening the door required not force, but the consent of the system. And that was precisely what made it terrifying. If the seal responded to your touch, then the ancient project had provided not merely for a passage, but for an heir. Saya studied the runes for about an hour. Ragna tapped along the edges of the door and frowned. Mira tried to read the flow of magic. Lena searched for hidden traps. Yara examined the side channels, while Nera remained silent the entire time, as though listening to something beneath the wall. Finally, she said, "There is not only a seal here. There is also a question." "What question?" Aaron asked. Nera looked at the door. Who should enter? And then it became clear why the system had reacted to him. Not because he was strong, and not because he was intelligent, but because he had gathered together what the ancients had torn apart, the connection between the worlds. "So entry is possible only for the one who preserved the alliance?" Saya said quietly. "It seems so," Nera replied. "The creator wanted the final layer to be opened, not by a conqueror, but by a keeper of balance." Aaron gave a joyless smirk. "I never thought a poor farm would become a pass into an ancient archive." He pressed his palm harder. The door slowly slid into the wall. Beyond it was not a corridor, but an enormous round hall, carved directly into the depths of the earth. A tall pedestal stood in the center, surrounded by numerous rings and channels, as though the entire hall were a heart that still remembered how to beat. And a figure stood in the center. Not a human, not a spirit, not a magical phantom in the usual form. It was something between a memory and a consciousness. A translucent silhouette in a long cloak made of light and stone. Its face was hidden, but its voice sounded as though it spoke not with a mouth, but through the very architecture of the hall. "You came later than I had hoped, but earlier than I had feared." Arn did not step back. "You created the portals. Yes. Why?" The figure remained silent for several seconds. "To save the worlds after the fracture." Nera lowered her head. "Then the legend did not lie." "A legend always lies by half," the figure replied. "That allows it to survive the truth." Aaron clenched his teeth. "Why hide the lower layer? Why deprive us of knowledge?" The figure turned toward him. "Because knowledge without maturity destroys faster than war. Your ancestors already proved that. They found the network and began drawing out resources and power, forgetting that the system had been created for exchange, not plunder. Then the second fracture began. And to preserve at least something, I sealed part of the truth. And the other worlds, I left them alive. Incomplete, but alive. For the first time, Aaron felt not anger, but heaviness. Because what stood before him was neither evil nor good. It was a decision made by someone who had seen too many catastrophes. So we have lived our entire lives upon the fragments of your choice, he said quietly. Yes, the figure replied, and now you stand before your own. Another ring rose in the center of the hall. It had 5 empty recesses and 1 central recess. What is this? Mira asked. A trial, the figure replied. Not magical, spiritual and practical. If you want to preserve the network, you must prove that you understand its meaning. And how do we do that? Yara asked. The figure did not answer immediately. Each world must voluntarily give what it considers its core. Not forever. For balance. And not in money, not in words. A real contribution that will be difficult to surrender. Aaron understood immediately this was not sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice. It was about maturity. They had to show that the alliance was built not on profit, but on mutual responsibility. What is required from each world, he asked. The ring answered by itself. Images lit up across its surface. The desert world. Water, and not merely water, but the technology for accumulating it. The forest world. Seeds of ancient roots capable of strengthening the soil. The sea world. Salt and seaweed for purification and nourishment. The white world. A light crystal that kept magic at a stable level. The rocky world. The primary ingot of primordial metal from which the network channel could be repaired. Nera whispered, "These are the key gifts. If they do not give them voluntarily, the system will not accept you as full keepers." Aaron slowly nodded. It was fair. And extremely dangerous politically. Because asking the worlds for not merely a commodity, but a symbol of their inner strength, meant testing whether they truly trusted the alliance. Above, new tension was already brewing. While Aaron was descending, Tarim took advantage of the pause and began spreading rumors. That Aaron had found an ancient power in the depths and now wanted to become not the first keeper, but the secret ruler of all the worlds. Some advisors began to grow nervous. Some of the sea clans began stirring again. The desert people asked whether the common reserve would become too strict. The rocky people feared that their metal would fall into foreign hands. The white people feared that magic would be subordinated to politics. When Aaron returned, he saw immediately the alliance was once again balanced on a thin edge. He did not argue with Tarim directly. Instead, he gathered the council and told them the truth about the lower hall, the creator, the seal, and the price. No embellishments, no mysticism for effect, only facts. We were offered not power but duty, he said. If we want to preserve the network, each world must contribute to its stability. Not because Aaron wants it, but because otherwise the system will begin to collapse again. Tarim smirked. Convenient. It all comes down to you having seen the truth while we are supposed to believe you. Not me, Aaron said. Everything can be verified. The formula, the runes, the network core, the energy exchange. I am not asking for blind faith. I am asking for responsibility. And that was stronger than any threat. Because now the question was not about Aaron's power, it was about everyone's survival. The council lasted 3 days. 3 days of arguments, calculations, concerns, and attempts to understand exactly how to give up the core without weakening a world. Aaron did not rush them. He gave everyone enough time for the decision to become their own. Saya, representing the desert world, was the first to agree. She proposed giving not water itself, but the blueprints for underground dew collectors and condensers that her people had perfected over centuries. Then Lena agreed on behalf of the forest people. Her clan gave ancient soil-strengthening roots capable of supporting large fields even on poor land. Yara brought from the sea not only salt and seaweed, but also a method for their sustainable storage and transportation. Mira, representing the white people, gave the main light crystal. Not one of the combat crystals, but a ritual magic stabilizer that could be used as a regulator for the entire system. Ragna, representing the Rocky people, brought the primary metal ingot from the oldest forge where the tradition of original creation was still preserved. When all 5 gifts rested in the rings of the lower hall, the network began to sound in a new way. Not like a mechanism, but like consent. And at that moment, the creator of the network lowered his head. "Now I see that I was not completely mistaken," he said. "You did not repeat the old war." Aaron felt his fingers tremble. "What happens now?" "Now you must understand the most important thing," the ancient voice replied. "Balance is not granted once and forever. It must be maintained, always." But at that very moment, Tarim made his move. While the council was occupied with transferring the gifts and discussing the new structure, his people attempted to seize one of the distribution warehouses. The plan was subtle: cause confusion in order to accuse Arin of concentrating power, then seize part of the reserve and present it as restoring freedom of trade. But they had underestimated him. The forest people noticed the movement first. The sea people intercepted the carts by the river. The rocky people blocked the approaches to the forges. The white people raised protective circles. The desert people blocked the path through the dry hollow. Arin arrived at the warehouse at the moment when Tarim had already realized that his people had fallen into a trap. "You have pretended to be a reasonable protester for too long," Aaron said, looking at him. "And now you have shown that you wanted not freedom, but a center of your own." Tarim stood in the dust, pale and furious. "And you still think you can hold everyone together?" "No," Aaron replied. "I think I can give them a reason not to split apart." Tarim gritted his teeth. "This is not over yet." "No," Aaron agreed. "But your role on the council is over. Tarim was not executed, he was not thrown into prison. But he was deprived of access to the common channels, and his supporters were required to sign new rules of transparency for exchange. It was harsh enough to break the conspiracy and gentle enough not to turn Tarim into a hero. After these events, Aaron truly understood for the first time that he had created not merely a settlement and not merely a trading nexus. He had created an organism. The desert provided the water system. The forest provided soil stability and food. The sea provided logistics, salt, and transportation. The white people provided magical regulation and healing. The rocky people provided metal and protection. And his world provided the land, order, and the place where all of it came together. It was a kingdom without a traditional crown, a kingdom without a single language. A kingdom whose strength lay not in conquest but in connection. And yet, below in the ancient hall, the creator of the network spoke one final sentence that gave Aaron no peace. "I left one more door, the last one. If one day you are ready to become not merely keepers, but builders of a new cycle, you will find it. But remember, what lies behind it does not wait for alliances. It waits for a choice." Aaron remembered those words, because experience had taught him, when the ancients spoke of a choice, there was always a price behind it that could not be seen immediately.